So I have decided that I'm going to give myself the luxury of a 4 to 6 week break from paying attention to the news on the daily, because otherwise, with my job and my life, I'm just going to drive myself insane, because generally the news is not so good. So basically what I've been doing is checking in once a week with the various publications I follow, and then otherwise basically only reading the occasional interesting news story as it comes across my feed, but not actively seeking things out like I typically do. And the last week or so it's been working pretty well, so I think I'm going to do it for a little while longer. In October, I'll probably be releasing some more videos that kind of fall into the pop culture vein. I really want to do some reviews and deconstructions of different horror movies and aspects of the horror genre. And who knows, I might even get really wild and actually use some editing software instead of just talking at the camera in a single long take and then hoping that I don't fuck it up, which is what I have been doing for the last 46 videos and will probably do for most of the remainder. Anyway, that is not what this video is about. This video is about another cartoon trope, because I really enjoyed making the video yesterday, or the day before, whenever I made that video, and I really was very entertained by the discussion that happened on my Facebook page with the post that I wrote about the same subject. So I'm probably going to write an accompanying post for this one as well, just because I find adult animation and cartoons to be really interesting. I find animation in general to be a really interesting medium, but adult animation in particular, I think, has a lot of very interesting commentary and a very unique ability to really bend and explore different concepts because of the nature of animation as a more artistic and stylized medium. You can get away with things in animation that you can't really get away with in live action, not even in terms of just plot and characters, but in terms of designs and concepts as well. So in this episode, I'm going to be talking about 3 shows primarily. That's Family Guy, American Dad, and The Simpsons. I recognize that 2 of these are Seth MacFarlane properties, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. And the trope that we're going to discuss in this video is basically the reckless, selfish dad character that sort of bumbles around buffoonishly and for various reasons causes cycles of abuse to perpetuate with his family. This character is not entirely unique to adult animation. It can be found in a lot of mainstream sitcoms, in a lot of rom-coms as well. But I think in adult animation you see the trope really, brought to its most extreme because you can do that in a cartoon. Now, I'm going to be in before the people who go ahead and post long rants about how it's just a cartoon and I'm reading too much into it. Okay, if you think it's just a cartoon and I'm reading too much into it, then why are you watching a video about it? Like, go watch the cartoon or do whatever else. If cartoons don't matter to you, you don't need to have a conversation about them with me. Cool. All right. I think cartoons do matter. I think they have a significant influence on society like television in general does. I really think any mass media has an influence on society, either on a smaller scale or on a macro level. So in this episode, I keep saying episode, I think it's because I'm thinking of TV right now. We're going to talk about Peter Griffin, Stan Smith, and Homer Simpson. And I think what's really interesting is the characters that are most similar are not from the 2 Seth MacFarlane properties, but rather Family Guy and The Simpsons. I think Peter Griffin and Homer Simpson are the most similar characters in that both of them are, cartoonish in the degree to which they are reckless and careless and don't have a lot of forethought, and also in the way that they kind of wantonly abuse their family members and then apologize for it and then continue to do the exact same behavior the following episode. And I think what distinguishes American Dad is while it's still a cartoon like the other 2, it does have a little bit more of the loose continuity than these 2 shows have. I think, all 3 of these shows have a tiny bit of continuity, but because they're, cartoons and they tend to be episodal in nature, they really don't. Stan Smith, I would say, is the one who has had the most actual, character growth. If you go back and watch season 1, as painful as the animation is to look at compared to what they have now, you see that the character is a very different character and he's changed for the better, whereas with the other two, if you go back and you watch the first seasons of their shows and then you watch the current seasons, they have changed significantly for the worse. Homer, in particular, used to be a lot more measured and seemed a lot more middle of the road and just kind of normal levels of careless for a cartoon, whereas I think Peter has always been pretty outlandish, but Peter used to have this kind of, like, good-natured, like, boyish charm to underscore his behavior, and I think they've just kind of lost that now, or worse, turned it into something where it just seems like he's an immature asshole. And I think part of this is because both of the latter shows, Family Guy and The Simpsons, have been allowed to continue a lot longer than originally intended by the creators. And I think that's resulted in the creators getting really tired. If you look at both of these shows, they have the same plots over and over again through the series. I think partially because they just run out of ideas. There's really only so many scenarios that you can have. Scenarios? I'm unable to speak. But with American Dad, I think that as the show goes on, Stan becomes slowly a bit more of a nuanced character. I won't say that he's, like, actually a nuanced character because he's still pretty buffoonish. But he's definitely fun to watch. And, you know, I like these shows. I grew up watching these shows. And while Family Guy is the one that probably I have the most negative opinion of now, I do still find myself putting it on to watch in the background sometimes. But I do think these shows also do a lot of harm in the way that they kind of make these characters' abusive behaviors seem okay. And I think a good term for this is lamp shading, which I think was coined by the pop culture detective in his video, The Adorkable Misogyny of the Big Bang Theory, in which he basically conceptualizes it as the idea that a show makes racist, misogynistic, homophobic, ableist, whatever-ist jokes, and then tries to justify it by either having the characters call them out or by making some kind of little wink to the audience that what they said was terrible. The problem is they then immediately undercut that by having the rest of the characters basically act like it's not that bad, like it's harmless, and then they kind of go on with the rest of the show. And while I try not to be the joke police, and I recognize that if you tried to police comedians to make everything sanitized to the level that, you know, I would expect of, say, a politician, comedians would become boring. You would ruin comedy. I do think there are reasonable limits and expectations that you can kind of discuss, if not in any way impose. Because I don't think there's anything wrong with criticizing these ideas as long as you're not trying to jail comedians. That was a tangent, I'm sorry. So back to what this entire video is about. I take kind of an umbrage with this. I take umbrage with this idea because the characters and the way that they're created is really negative towards men, and the shows themselves are often really negative towards women. They position women in the same way that bumbling TV commercials do, as the fun-killing nag who has the buffoonish, idiotic husband that she has to keep in line. And the husband is a buffoonish idiot that needs to be kept in line by his nagging wife, because otherwise he would kill himself. He's so fucking stupid. That is how dumb, especially Peter Griffin and Homer Simpson are. They are utterly childish and actively portrayed that way. And I think it's kind of harmful because it perpetuates the idea that men aren't responsible for their own behaviors because they're just silly men. And I think that's incredibly condescending to men as well, in the same way that I think a lot of the justification for other negative male behaviors, like, oh, men are just wired that way, I think that's really condescending to men. I think men can and should be better than that. And I think if the satire of these characters was more clearly stated, if the abuse was less winked at and less underscored as being harmless, these shows might be a lot more positive in their contributions in that area. And I will grant that perhaps my perspective as someone who works closely with domestic violence victims and victims of abuse, I understand that I might be more sensitive to this than other people. I don't expect everyone to have my perspective or agree with me. This is simply my opinion after years and years and years of watching how these characters have developed. Because, you know, Homer Simpson has been on the air for decades. There's around 25 years of TV to watch with him. And ultimately, I think that when we're watching these shows, it's okay to laugh, it's okay to watch these shows, it's okay to like these characters to an extent, but I think we do need to be more critical of them and own the negative behaviors that do come from assuming positive things about these characters. And unlike the shows in the previous episode, in which I think the writing actually does do a good enough job of justifying the satire and of making the perspective on the characters very, very clear, I think all three of these shows don't really do a good enough job of portraying these characters as anything other than lovable idiot. There is no real analysis on any kind of actual intentioned abuse for the most part. It's usually portrayed as the lovable idiot. And I think that trope is a negative one. That being said, I'll still watch all of these shows, so I'm not any better than any of you. That's all I have on this. Drop any comments or perspectives that you have, or angry rants about how I'm an evil man-hating feminazi in the comments down below. And Wiedersehen, bitches.